Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to do a retro review reaction of the 1990 GM minivans, you know, the Dustbuster minivans. I have kind of a connection to this because my family owned one, and my mom, you know, irregardless of what it was, my mom was kind of fond of it. So let's see where it goes.
Well, hello and welcome again to Motorweek 90. We're glad to have you with us. 6 years ago, Chrysler introduced its front-wheel drive minivans, and the American family hasn't been the same since.
When it came to the minivan wars of the 80s and 90s between GM, Chrysler, Ford, Toyota, and Honda, Chrysler really had the market, you know, pretty cornered.
Overnight, the full-size station wagon was out, and the compact, maneuverable minivan was in. Since then, Chrysler has had many minivan challengers to its Caravan and Voyager, but they've all lacked one important feature. They weren't front-wheel drive. So, while some newcomers have such advantages as better towing ability, they have not stopped the Chrysler minivan juggernaut. Now, perhaps that may change. By the middle of October, the first of General Motors' APV, all-purpose vehicles, will leave the showrooms. They are roomy, comfortable, and above all, front-wheel drive. The GM APVs are also something else, rakishly stylish.
Okay, I know that we're going to get a lot of laughs about this, but today we look at these vans with the big glass and it's raked and the huge dashboards, but back then, usually I am not a fan of General Motors products from this time period, and the quality was still crap, but I gotta say, you know, at least they took a risk that nobody else would have been willing to take. The front end styling of this thing is kind of polarizing. The piece of glass that's actually in front of the front window, the little triangular piece of glass, makes it look even longer. I remember the dashboard in ours was so long that if a pen rolled down the dashboard towards the windshield, you had to send your kids scrambling to try to get it. So yeah, I can see how this was an acquired taste.
When we drove this pilot production Chevrolet Lumina APV around our neighborhood, passers-by remarked that it looked more like something the Jetsons would own than an apple pie American.
You know, I remember as a kid, my cousins coming to visit, and the Lumina was parked in the garage, and I remember even as little kids, we did think it looked like a spaceship, and we did pretend that we were in a spaceship while it was sitting there.
The APV is, without question, the most futuristic-looking vehicle ever produced by Detroit. And you will see lots of them over the next year under 3 different nameplates. While the Chevy Lumina APV will be the volume leader, Pontiac will go after the sporting crowd with its Transport.
Okay, I get that people joke about Pontiac's body cladding on the lower parts of these vehicles, the Grand Ams, the Grand Prix, the Bonnevilles. But on this Lumina, the front bumper of the Pontiac with the fog lights, I think that actually looks pretty good, and it kind of does work.
While having the same basic shape, the Transport has a far more aggressive front end and uses sculptured lower body panels for a road-hugging effect. One reason GM can afford to make the Transport look different from the Lumina is the unique way the APV is constructed. All the body panels are plastic, which is cheaper to alter than a steel skin. The panels are hung and glued on a steel space frame, not unlike the one used on Pontiac's Fiero. The result is a rigid vehicle that can be
About this time, Saturn started to become kind of big, and Saturn did the same thing. They hung plastic panels on the frame.
rather quickly, which leads us to the third APV entry, the Oldsmobile Silhouette. This late...
Okay, you don't see any Luminas on the road anymore. They're just gone. I don't know if they sold very many. The GM powertrains were trash. Everyone knows that. But strangely enough, there is an Oldsmobile Silhouette in this exact color that runs around Pella once in a while. Once in a great while you'll see it. But besides that, there's not even any in any wrecking yards. These things just disintegrated.
Decision by GM is a test to see if traditional big olds wagon buyers will go for the minivan concept. It shares some of the Lumina and Transport styling outside with a unique ultra-luxury interior inside. We're not sure if minivan buyers want leather seats, but in the Silhouette they are available. One thing all APVs have in common, though, is the long, low profile. The spaceship exterior includes...
I'm actually a fan of the larger taillights. I think that's a good safety measure, kind of reminiscent of Volvo station wagons. But as far as the back end goes, it's pretty boring.
Huge high-mounted tail lamps that are impossible to miss. But it's the long, sharply raked nose that's the most controversial item.
I will say, you know, back in the early 90s, you know, if you saw one of these coming, you knew exactly what it was. You wouldn't mistake it for anything else. And that was a big windshield.
On the APV. Not only can you not see the nose from the driver's seat, but you can barely reach stray items that might roll to the bottom of the windshield. While this may put some buyers off when they first sit in the APV, you do get used to it after a few miles of driving. It will be important for dealers to encourage APV prospects to test drive this vehicle. While the huge windshield looks suitable for an unwanted suntan, a special coating reflects...
You know a windshield is big when they mention getting a suntan from the windshield. No other car that I've ever seen reviewed on Motorweek even brought that up.
60% of the solar radiation. And these spider-like wipers do a good job of keeping it clean.
I know a lot of these wipers on cars that GM made, they ended up having computer issues. So the windshield wipers, as they come down, they wouldn't rest in a down position. They would rest up like this.
Even in heavy rains, outward visibility is excellent. Despite styling and front-wheel drive, however, we feel that it is the APV's unique features that will appeal to buyers most. The best features, we think, involve the seats. Up to 7...
Yeah, of course you had your your driver and your passenger up front, but instead of bench seats, they had 5 individual bucket seats. And I will say, when we took a trip to Yellowstone Park, we put in the front row of seats, we put the center one down, and my sister and I had a table on on our sides. And this, to me, I don't know why they didn't do this before, but this seems like such a better option. The front rows in the back had 3 seats, and then, as you can see, the rear had 2 seats.
Individual bucket seats are available in the rear. Each weighs less than 35 pounds and can be removed in seconds by one person. So you can carry long items without clearing the deck. The seats also fold for easy access to the back row. In fact, with a wide hatch, the combinations available for seating or hauling in the APV are limited only by your imagination. And if you think Chrysler has a monopoly on cup holders, you haven't seen the APV. Almost every flat surface...
Okay, let's be serious. If you look at that coffee cup, how much of that coffee cup is actually in the cup holder? They weren't real cup holders. They were just formed pieces of plastic. It really wasn't anything that you were going to put a drink today in, or even back then.
Has them. Not to mention storage nooks, from doors to glove box to dash top to dash center. If you lose something in the APV, it could be just about anywhere. There is a remote release for the fuel door and a handy pull strap on the hatch. While the hatch glass is fixed, it is...
You know, it's funny that we see that pull strap on the rear hatch. My friend Michael has a Jeep, and of course, you know, nowadays there's a button you have to push to get the rear hatch to come down, and you just think, so we're incapable of just reaching up and grabbing the hatch to close it. We need another thing that's going to end up, you know, failing. Kind of like when we did that Lincoln review, and the trunk, you close it, and then the trunk does that last little bit with a motor. And I just think to myself, how many more things can we put in a car that are going to fail?
Kept clean by a standard wiper and washer. While the overall dash design is the same on all models, the driver's pod...
Man, even if you didn't know about GM cars in the 90s, the upholstery, you know, was just cheap. The seats were cheap. That just looks cheap to me. I mean, the steering wheel, everything just looks thin and cheap. You know, these cars, just like the 90 Beretta, because this is about the same time, that 87 Beretta we did, has the little piece of fabric that you could use to slide envelopes on the visors that sagged, and the headliners sagged, and plastics broke because they were absolute trash. It's just funny to me to look back at these videos and then think, like, how long did these parts actually last? Like 3-4 years the seats were completely just trashed.
Differs. The Lumina has a deep hood design similar to the Corsica Beretta. That includes the gauges. However, in the APV, the deep hood makes the gauges hard to read when wearing sunglasses. The Transport and Silhouette use an instrument pod design similar to the Pontiac Grand.
Okay, these plastics, still trash, still GM, still garbage in the early 90s, but I do like the layout of this dashboard a little better.
And Prix. The large fingertip switches and sporty gauges communicate quickly that these APVs are far more car than truck. The center dash area is common to all designs, with a push-button heat and air conditioning panel and a good choice of stereo options, including one with a compact disc. A rear heater is also available. As for ventilation, the slick body shape enables the driver to roll down the side glass without being blasted with...
Oh, look, John Davis just rolled down the window in that Lumina. I wonder if it's going to come back up. Oh, 60-70% of the time, you'd end up in a situation where the window would fall and the window would not come back up.
There, a feature we like. And unlike its leading competitor, we found the pop-out side glass doesn't rattle at high...
Funny story, my mom and dad were at a car wash, and there was a line of people behind my dad, and they were getting ready to go put the car through the automatic car wash. My dad rolls down the window, and then they maybe had this thing 2 or 3 years, and sure enough, it came off the track and the window wouldn't go up, and the people in the line, of course, were not going to move. So my dad just told my mom to buckle up, and they just slid right through the automatic car wash with the water coming at them. But they didn't have any choice because, you know, GM windows, you know, heartbeat of America. If the GM was the heartbeat of America, people were having heart attacks and strokes, let me tell you.
Highway speeds. One option is a load leveling suspension that includes a tire or volleyball air inflator. But all is not perfect on the APV. While the only power is a 3.1-liter V6, it uses...
I've talked about these motors before in the Beretta video, but head gaskets, intake failure. It's a really weak motor to put in a minivan, I will say.
Throttle body fuel injection for only a 120 horsepower rating. That's
120 horsepower to pull a minivan. Now imagine pulling a minivan with 7 people, some of which were adults, and some suitcases, or the people that put the big tub on top, you know, on the rack to hold more luggage. That's insane. That's so unsafe.
It's less than Chrysler's 3-liter V6. And while Chrysler offers a 4-speed automatic, the APV comes only with a 3-speed. Also, when placed in drive, the large shifter handle blocks your vision of some heat and radio controls. The EPA rates the APV at a modest 18 city and 22 highway fuel economy. We managed 19 on our APV. That's 20% less than the last Chrysler minivan we tested. On the other hand, track performance was good and compares well to the Chrysler competition. Acceleration from 0 to 60 took 12.3 seconds, with a rather quick...
That's 12.3 seconds unloaded. Now imagine that with the weight of 7 people and suitcases. That would be just downright dangerous coming on an off-ramp.
Quarter mile of 18.4 seconds at 74 miles per hour.
Well, maybe not dangerous back then due to the fact that everything was comparable, but by today's standards, that would be very dangerous.
Handling is benign. While most front drive car characteristics are present, the steering has good feel and the rear end stays reasonably well planted in emergency maneuvers. We did find some tendency for the APV to wander on straight roads, but crosswinds have little effect on its slick body. Braking is typical for a front disc rear drum arrangement. There is some tendency for the front wheels to lock, but the pedal is very easy to modulate. Stops were straight, although our braking average of 139 feet represents a fair amount of fade over 6 stops.
Yeah, that's a real problem, that fair amount of fade after 6 panic stops. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who buy a minivan so they can go autocross or go through the cones and slam on the brakes 6 times. I really don't believe that that's going to be a problem for people because, like I said, I'm pretty sure they're not trying to stop in an emergency 6 times in a row.
But there was no tendency for the unloaded rear wheels to come around. APV highway ride is excellent with lots of comfort, although we highly recommend ordering the optional 15-inch wheels which give better control. The interior is quiet with a sound level reading of 68 decibels at 55. With an eye-catching shape and a superior array of seating options, we frankly came away with very friendly first.
Eye-catching, you know, they say an eye-catching shape. Well, that doesn't mean good-looking. You know, you can see a car accident that you pass on the highway where it looks terrible, but it's going to catch your eye.
Impressions about the Chevrolet Lumina APV as well as the Pontiac Transport and Oldsmobile Silhouette. They effectively take the front-drive minivan concept of the 80s well into the 90s. Granted, the captivating shape does make for an intimidating first time behind the wheel, but other APV features more than compensate. While only time will tell if the public feels the same, we think a lot more families besides the Jetsons are going to fall in love with the APV.
You know, funny story. I talk about like GM cars of this time period, you know, the clear coat on the paint would fail. I remember the clear coat failing on my mom's van, and my dad, of course, you know, he looks at it and he tells me, you know, I'm a kid and everything, you know, and he says, even then I know it was a joke, but my dad said, you know what's wrong with the paint on this thing? I said, what's that? You know, my mom's driveway, dad's driveway, you'd come out of the driveway and immediately you had to take a left around a corner. He said, your mom drives so crazy and so fast that it's actually peeling the paint off the top of this van. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure. But I just remember my mom having the similar problems that you would have with any GM product back then. Heater core went bad, windows falling off the track, plastics breaking, the seats being incredibly uncomfortable. And all of these things happened within the first 5 years of ownership because they didn't really own it too long because my parents would trade up and get something better or more reliable. And it just kind of goes to show that it wasn't just small cars that GM was cheaping out on. They cheaped out on everything. Later on, if I'm not mistaken, I think they came out with the 3800 motor in these and a 4-speed automatic, which helped acceleration and your ability to carry more people. But like I said, 120 horsepower, you know, that's Toyota Corolla powertrain in like the mid-2000s. That's very dangerous when you're trying to carry that many people. And again, I understand that, you know, it's comparable to what cars were putting out back then, but other cars were able to put out more than 120. Yeah, just bad quality control. And you don't see any of these anymore. You just don't. People have asked me, these cars like Saturn and these GM vans that had the plastic panels, what happened to the plastic panels? You know, they say they're not you can't recycle them like you recycle steel or aluminum. Well, that's not exactly true. Little things like they would take these vans and they would be put through a machine that would shred up the plastic panels. And when you go down the road in the wintertime and you think about all the potholes, but then come springtime, they put black asphalt over the top of the road, that is made up of some of that plastic from those vans or these Saturns. When your kids go to the park and there's that squishy surface for them to walk on, so in case they fall and hurt themselves, that comes from a lot of these plastics that were shredded up. So they were recycled. But like I said, I cannot tell you the last time, might have been 4 or 5 years since I saw one of those vans at a salvage yard. I did have a friend that worked with my fiance. His mother passed away and they were cleaning out her apartment, and she had a Lumina APV minivan, like I said, 5, 6 years ago, I can't remember. And this thing was raggedy. It was a piece of garbage. And I asked him, I said, how does this thing stay on the road? And he said she drove it once a week to the grocery store and that was it. But it was a pile. So if you have memories, and I'm sure my mom's going to say something, you know, because she really liked her van and I'm sitting here talking bad about them. If you really loved your van, one of these, let me know. And if you have any other car that you'd like me to look at, go ahead and put it down in the comments. All right, see you guys.